Good evening. Welcome in. Get comfortable. Tonight we are going to do something a little different. Instead of explaining how a piece of technology works, we are going to follow a true story. A story about one person, one investigation, and one very small number that turned out to mean something much larger than it seemed. The person is Cliff Stoll. In 1986, Stoll was an astronomer, a quiet, patient observer of very distant things, who had recently taken a new job as a systems administrator at a research laboratory in Berkeley, California. A few weeks into the job, someone asked him to look into a tiny discrepancy in the laboratory's accounting system. The amount in question was 75 cents. What he found, over the months that followed, was considerably more than a rounding error. We are going to tell this story in a way that puts you inside it. When we say you, we mean Stoll. You are the astronomer who has become a systems administrator. You are the person sitting at the terminal late at night. You are the one reading the logs and making the phone calls and trying to understand what the records are telling you. This is his story, told as if you were living it. It moves slowly, the way the investigation itself moved slowly. And there is nothing in it that requires you to stay awake. There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing you need to remember. If you drift off at any point tonight, that is perfectly fine. This story will still be here. The machines will still be running. That is one of the things you can always count on. And before we go any further, a small question for you. Are you listening to relax, to study, or to fall asleep tonight? There is no right answer. Just notice it quietly for yourself. Section 1. The 75-cent error. There is a building on the eastern edge of the University of California campus in Berkeley that sits at the foot of the hills. It is a working laboratory, the kind of place where serious people do serious work, where the computers hum through the night even when the hallways are empty and the parking lots are still. The building looks out over the city. On a clear night, you can see the lights of San Francisco across the bay and the darkness of the water between, and the long, slow sweep of the bridge. It is the kind of view that makes the world feel large and also, somehow, manageable. A thing that can be taken in from a sufficient distance and understood. Inside the building, past the reception desk and down a corridor that smells faintly of electronics and old carpet, is a computing center. In 1986, that computing center contains a cluster of mini-computers, machines about the size of large refrigerators, beige and impeccably engineered, connected to each other by cables and to the outside world by a series of telephone lines and data circuits that run, invisibly, beneath the streets and across the country. These machines are shared by hundreds of researchers. They run experiments, process data, send messages, file results. They are the infrastructure of a particular kind of intellectual work, and they are always on. They run through the day and through the night, and through the weekends and through the holidays. They do not need to rest. It is August of 1986, and you have a new job. The job is not what you expected, and not what you planned for. 6 months ago, you were an astronomer. Not a famous one, not a professor with a named chair and a dedicated telescope. The kind of astronomer who works at night, alone, or nearly so, tracking faint objects moving slowly across enormous distances, coaxing signal from noise at the edge of detection. You knew how to be patient in the specific way that kind of work requires. The patience of someone who cannot rush the sky, who must wait for the seeing to settle, who learns to hold attention steady on something that moves too slowly for the human eye to register in real time. That skill, the practiced, deliberate patience of the night shift observer, would turn out to be useful in ways you could not have predicted. But that is later. For now, you are a systems administrator. The position opened at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, a national research laboratory affiliated with the University of California, and you needed the work, so you took it. Systems administrators are the people who keep computers running. They create and manage user accounts, troubleshoot broken connections, install software updates, and field the steady stream of small complaints and puzzlements that arise when many people share a computing system and things do not always work as expected. The work is unglamorous in the way that essential infrastructure is unglamorous. Invisible when it is functioning correctly, very visible when it is not. The laboratory has a computing center. It is built around a cluster of VAX systems, computers made by the Digital Equipment Corporation. Powerful and reliable machines that run an operating system called Unix. These machines are connected to each other, and through a series of links and gateways to the ARPANET, the network that connects universities, research laboratories, and a number of military installations across the country. In 1986, the ARPANET is a remarkable and still somewhat novel thing. It is the demonstration, proven and operational, that computers scattered across an enormous geography can talk to one another, route messages around obstacles, share resources, and keep working even when parts of the system go down. It is, in the most literal sense, the precursor to everything we now take for granted when we assume that our devices can reach any other device on Earth. You are responsible for a small piece of this. The systems at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, their users, their connections outward to the wider network. That is your domain, at least for now. A few weeks into the job, your manager asks you to look into a small discrepancy in the accounting system. He has found it in the monthly report, and it is bothering him. The laboratory's computers are a shared resource, and shared resources need to be tracked and billed. Different research groups are charged for the computing time their people use, processor cycles, storage, network traffic. An automated system handles most of this, recording usage and generating charges and reconciling the accounts. It is, under normal circumstances, a background process that no one thinks very much about. The monthly reports are supposed to balance perfectly. This one does not. Except that the accounts do not quite balance. Someone, or something, has used computing time without being charged for it. The amount involved is 75 cents. 75 cents. You could let this go. Any reasonable person would let this go. A 75-cent billing discrepancy in a computing center that processes hundreds of accounts and thousands of transactions is the kind of thing that gets noted in a comment somewhere and forgotten. It is almost certainly a software glitch, a rounding error in the billing code, a database entry that failed to update correctly, a timing issue in how sessions are recorded and charged. These things happen in complex systems. The word for them, when they are as small as this, is essentially noise. Background noise in the accounting, beneath the threshold of concern. But you are new to this job, and you are thorough by nature, and something about it stays with you. You pull up the accounting log, and you start to look. The accounting log is exactly what its name suggests, a record. Every time a user logs into the laboratory's systems, the system makes a note. Every time a program runs, a file is accessed, storage is used, a connection is made, the system records it. The log is maintained partly so that usage can be billed correctly, and partly because that is simply what well-designed computer systems do. They keep a faithful record of everything that happens, because the record is useful in all kinds of ways that you cannot always predict in advance. A log is a kind of institutional memory. It knows everything and forgets nothing, provided no one deletes it. You find the entry associated with the 75-cent gap. It belongs to a guest account, the kind of account that is sometimes created for temporary users, visitors or collaborators who need access for a limited time. This account has been active, computing time has been used, but the billing record is incomplete, which is why the discrepancy exists. You pull the full session log for this account, and you start reading the entries. A session log contains, for each session, a timestamp for when the session started, a list of every command that was issued during the session in the order they were issued, and a timestamp for when the session ended. It is a faithful record in the way that a security camera is a faithful record. It captures what happened without interpreting it, without judgment, without any sense of whether what it recorded was ordinary or extraordinary. The log does not know what the commands mean. It only knows that they happened. You read the sessions associated with this account. There are several of them, spread across different days. And something about the pattern of them is wrong in a way you cannot immediately articulate. A log entry for a legitimate researcher looks like this. A login in the mid-morning. A series of commands that connect logically to each other. Opening a data file. Running an analysis program. Writing results to a new file. Perhaps sending a message to a colleague. The commands have a coherence to them. They are going somewhere. Even when you do not know what the research is about, you can feel the shape of productive work in the sequence of the commands. Purpose, method, result. A session that makes sense. The sessions in the guest account do not make sense in that way. The commands do not cohere. They are not going anywhere in particular. They are checking things. Directory listings, system files, user account information, network configuration. In a way that would only make sense if you were new to the machine and were trying to understand its structure. But this account had been active for some time. It was not new to the machine. And yet each session begins with the same orientation, the same survey, as if the account were arriving somewhere unfamiliar and needed to get its bearings before proceeding. You sit with this for a long time. You print the log. You take the printout to your desk. You read it again. You do not close the file. The accounting log held a 75-cent discrepancy, and beneath it, something that did not belong. A set of sessions with patterns of movement that looked less like research and more like reconnaissance. You did not yet have a name for what you were looking at. You only knew that the record did not make sense, and that you were the kind of person who needed things to make sense. Section 2. What the network was. Before we go further into this story, it is worth pausing to understand the world it happened inside. Because 1986 was genuinely different from now, in ways that matter for understanding how the investigation unfolded and why it was as difficult as it was. The ARPANET, the network that Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory was connected to, had been running since 1969. It was built by the United States Department of Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is where the ARPA in ARPANET comes from. The original idea behind it was deceptively simple. Build a network that could keep working even if parts of it were damaged or destroyed. The older model of communication, everything routing through a central hub, the way telephone calls were switched through central offices, was brittle. destroy the hub, and the whole network fails. The ARPANET's designers proposed something different. Instead of routing everything through a central point, break the information into small pieces and send those pieces along whatever path through the network is available at the time of sending. If one path is blocked, try another. If one node goes down, route around it. The information finds its own way, packet by packet, through whatever connections happen to be working, and reassembles itself correctly at the destination. This approach is called packet switching, and it works extraordinarily well. It is still, in its essential form, how data moves through the internet today. The information you send when you load a web page or send a message does not travel as a continuous stream down a single wire. It travels as a collection of small, labeled packets, each one finding its own route through the network, each one carrying enough information to be reassembled in the correct order when it arrives. The route one packet takes might be slightly different from the route the next packet takes. None of this is visible to you. The network handles it. By 1986, the ARPANET has been running for 17 years and has grown considerably. It connects hundreds of institutions, universities, national laboratories, defense contractors, military installations. The people on it are mostly researchers and academics, working in fields with some relationship to defense research or advanced science. People who know each other, or know of each other, who share a professional community and a set of shared norms about how the network should be used. It is a community in a meaningful sense of that word, not just a collection of machines, but a collection of relationships between institutions, maintained by people who generally trusted each other, because they were, in most cases, working towards similar ends. That trust was not naive. The engineers who designed the ARPANET were sophisticated people who understood that systems fail and can be misused. But the trust was structural, meaning it was built into the architecture of how the network operated. When a computer on the ARPANET received a connection from another computer that it recognized, a machine it had an established relationship with, from an institution that was part of the network, it tended to extend a significant degree of trust to that connection. The assumption was that people who had credentials to be on the network belonged there, and that they would behave appropriately. It is worth being specific about what this trust looked like in practice. Many systems on the ARPANET maintained what were called trust lists, lists of other machines from which connections would be accepted with reduced or no password verification. If your machine trusted the machine at a partner institution, and someone at that institution had an account on your system, they might be able to connect without entering a password. The logic was practical. You already knew who was on the partner institution's network. Additional verification was redundant. This was a reasonable assumption in a small community where most people knew each other. It became a different kind of assumption as the network grew. The concept of an adversary, someone using the network not to do research but to cause harm, to steal information, to use the openness of the academic community as a pathway into less open places, was not something the architects of the ARPANET had designed against in any serious way. This was not a failure of imagination, so much as a reflection of the world they were building for. They were building a network for a community. The security model that made sense for that community was one built on identity and trust, not on suspicion and verification. Remote login is worth understanding as a specific feature of this world. One of the practical achievements of the ARPANET was that it allowed a researcher at one institution to log into a computer at another institution and use it as if they were sitting in front of it. A physicist at Berkeley could run calculations on a machine in Massachusetts. A researcher in Virginia could access a database in California. A graduate student could check results on a supercomputer she had never been in the same room with. Computing resources could be shared across geography, which was a genuine and significant benefit for the research community. It is worth trying to feel what this was like in practice, because the experience of using a network in 1986 was profoundly different from anything we know now. You sat at a terminal, a screen and a keyboard, usually a dull green or amber display on a dark background, connected by a cable to one of the VAX machines down the hall. When you typed a command to connect to a computer at another institution, there was a pause, sometimes a long one. The connection had to be established through a chain of equipment. Your terminal to your local machine, your local machine through a gateway to the ARPANET, the ARPANET routing your request through whatever path was available to the destination machine, and then the destination machine deciding whether to accept your connection. When it worked, the characters you typed appeared on the remote machine's system, and the remote machine's responses appeared on your screen, but slowly, character by character, at the speed the network could carry them. There was a particular quality to that slowness. You could feel the distance in it. A command typed in Berkeley, traveling as electrical signals through copper wire, being broken into packets and routed across switching equipment and telephone circuits, and reassembled at the other end. The lag between pressing a key and seeing the result was the physical reality of geography asserting itself through the infrastructure. It was not the instantaneous, invisible connectivity we have now. It was something you sat with, something that reminded you, each time, that the machine you were talking to was not in the room with you. It was somewhere else, and the network was the narrow, patient conduit between you and it. But the relationships between machines that made remote login possible were also relationships of trust. A machine that accepted remote connections from a partner institution was trusting that institution's systems to vouch, in effect, for the users connecting from them. If one of those systems had been compromised, if someone had found a way into it who had no right to be there, then that compromised system became a doorway, a foothold from which to step further into the network, using the trust that the network had been designed to extend. One more thing worth understanding about 1986. What security tools looked like, or more precisely, what they did not look like. There were no firewalls monitoring traffic in and out of the laboratory's network. There were no intrusion detection systems running in the background, watching for unusual patterns and raising automated alerts. There was no software that could scan the session logs automatically and flag the kinds of anomalies that had caught your attention. None of that existed yet. If something strange was happening on your network, you found out about it the way you had found out, by reading the logs, by hand, line by line, because there was no other way. The tools for understanding what was happening on your network in 1986 were a terminal, a printer, and a person willing to sit and read. The ARPANET of 1986 was built for a community of researchers who trusted each other and shared resources freely. Its architecture reflected that trust in the most literal way. Connections between institutions carried an implicit vouching, a network-wide handshake that assumed good faith. The investigation ahead would require nothing more sophisticated than what was available to any user of the system. The log, the terminal, and the willingness to keep reading past the point where a reasonable person would have stopped. The campus is quieter now. The late summer light has softened into something amber and diffuse, and the sound of traffic on the roads below the laboratory has thinned to an occasional murmur. The building settles into its nighttime register. The hum of cooling fans, the faint tick of hard drives, the particular stillness of a place where the machines are awake and the people have mostly gone home. Section 3. The shape of the days. The office where you work is a busy place during the day. Researchers come and go, the phone rings, the printers run. There is the ambient noise of a working computing center, the hum of machines cooling themselves, the clatter of keyboards, the particular kind of focused busyness that happens in places where people are doing work that matters to them. The computing center serves the whole laboratory. Its users are physicists, chemists, engineers, mathematicians. They need the machines to be running, and they need them to be fast, and they need their files to be where they left them. That is your job, keeping everything in order. At night, the building empties out, and the quality of the silence changes. The human noise stops. What remains is the machines, the steady ambient presence of electronics running in the dark, the soft sound of cooling fans, the occasional click of a disk drive, the faint electromagnetic hum that server rooms all seem to produce, and that you stop hearing after a while, the way you stop hearing traffic in a city you have lived in long enough. It is not silence. It is the sound of a lot of careful, continuous work being done by things that do not need to sleep. You have started coming in at odd hours. The reason is practical. You have set up a printer, connected directly to one of the terminals, to capture everything that happens in the sessions you are watching. Not just the summary entries in the accounting log, but the full, real-time output. Every command as it is issued, every response from the system, every file name accessed, every connection attempted. The printer will run whenever the session is active, producing a continuous paper record of everything happening at the other end of the connection, in real time, as it happens. If the sessions occur at 2 in the morning, someone needs to be at the printer at 2 in the morning to watch the paper emerge and read it while it is fresh. That someone is you, and sometimes also Martha. Martha is your partner, and she has been willing, with what you will later recognize as remarkable patience, to sit with you through the night sessions, both of you watching the printer, taking notes on what is appearing, talking in low voices about what the commands might mean and where the connection might be coming from. This is what the investigation looks like from the inside in its early months. 2 people in a mostly empty building, a printer running in the dark, paper accumulating in the tray, the 2 of you reading. The printer has a particular sound when it is receiving output, a steady mechanical rhythm, the printhead moving across the page, the paper advancing line by line, each line representing a command or a response from the system. When the session is active and the account is moving quickly through directories, the printer runs almost continuously, line after line appearing in rapid succession. When the account pauses, when it has found something to read, or when it is waiting for a connection to establish, the printer goes quiet, and the silence in the room becomes more noticeable. You learn to read the sound of the printer as a kind of signal, the rhythm of movement, the silence of reading, the resumption of activity. The paper that accumulates in the tray is the physical residue of everything the account does, translated into ink on continuous feed paper, a permanent and tangible record that you can hold in your hands and spread across your desk and annotate with pencil marks. You begin keeping the printouts in binders. One binder, then two, then more. Each binder labeled with the dates of the sessions it contains. The paper record grows steadily, a physical accumulation that occupies space on the shelf the way the sessions occupy time in the log. You are building an archive of something you do not yet fully understand, and the act of building the archive, of preserving every session, reading every command, noting every connection, is itself a kind of patience. The same patience, perhaps, that you brought to the telescope. The willingness to keep recording what you observe, even when the pattern has not yet emerged from the observations. The sessions have a rhythm, which becomes clearer the more of them you watch. They happen most often in the late evening hours by California time, which, because of the time difference with Europe, corresponds to early morning hours there, though you do not know that yet. The session opens. There is a brief orientation phase, a quick survey of the environment, looking at which users are logged in, checking the state of the system, getting oriented in the way that someone entering an unfamiliar room gets oriented before they start moving through it. And then the methodical movement begins. The account moves through the file system the way a careful person moves through an unfamiliar library. Systematically, not randomly, checking the contents of directories and subdirectories, reading configuration files, looking at anything that might indicate what is stored here and what pathways the system has to other systems. It is not the movement of someone who knows exactly where they are going. It is the movement of someone mapping the territory. And then the account steps outside. Using the network connections available from the laboratory's machines, the gateways to the ARPANET, the trust relationships with other institutions, it reaches out to other systems. Military research networks, defense contractors, government computing systems. It moves through them with the same patient, methodical attention it brings to the laboratory's own machines, looking for things, not breaking anything, not deleting anything, not leaving any obvious marks, just looking. Moving through systems it has no authorization to access, using the trust architecture of the network as a corridor. The range of the movement is considerable, and it expands over time. Early sessions stay closer to home, the laboratory's own systems and a few nearby institutions on the network. Later sessions reach further. Military research centers, installations at universities that have defense contracts, sites that a university astronomer turned systems administrator would have no straightforward reason to be accessing, even if the access were authorized. Each session seems to have a slightly clearer sense of the territory than the last, as if the map were being refined with each visit. The methodical survey quality of the early sessions gives way, gradually, to a more targeted kind of movement. Still patient, still quiet, but increasingly direct. You try to report this. This seems like the right thing to do. You are watching something that does not belong, something that is using the laboratory systems as a base of operations for accessing systems far more sensitive than a university computing center. You call the FBI. The agent who takes your call listens. You explain the accounting discrepancy, the anomalous sessions, the movement through the network, the access to military systems. There is a pause. The agent asks whether any actual damage has been done, whether anything has been deleted, whether any classified information has been confirmed as taken. You say you are not sure, but that something is clearly wrong. The agent notes your report and suggests you call back if anything more concrete emerges. You call the CIA. You call the Department of Defense. You get variations of the same response. Polite, non-committal, unsure where your report fits into the categories they are accustomed to working with. The concept of what you are describing does not yet have a home in any of these agencies. There are no units dedicated to it, no established protocols, no one who has done this before and knows how it should be handled. You are describing something that the institutions responsible for national security do not yet have a name for, and things without names are difficult to act on. So you go back to the printer. The investigation had taken on a shape by autumn of 1986. Late nights, a running printer, a partner willing to sit through the dark hours, and a set of institutions that did not know what to do with what you were telling them. You were tracking something moving through the network with patience and purpose, connecting from your machines to others with no authorization to do so. You had very few tools and no precedent to follow. What you had was the printouts, the log, and the astronomer's habit of watching slow-moving things in the dark. Section 4. What the sessions showed. The GNU Emacs text editor is a piece of software with a long history and a dedicated following among people who work seriously with computers. It is powerful and extensible to an unusual degree, a tool that can be made to do a remarkable range of things by someone who understands it well. It is also a large and complex piece of software, and all large and complex software contains, somewhere within it, imperfections. Gaps between how the software was designed to behave and how it actually behaves under certain specific conditions. In 1986, a component of GNU Emacs called MoveMail contained such a gap. MoveMail was a small utility, a helper program, designed to move email messages from a system mailbox to a user's personal mailbox. It was a modest and practical piece of software, doing a modest and practical job. But the way it handled certain inputs was not quite right, and a person who understood precisely how it was not quite right could use that knowledge to do something the software was not supposed to allow: gain elevated access to the system. What computer security people call root access. Root access on a Unix system means something close to total control. The root user, sometimes called the superuser, can read any file, modify any file, create any account, delete any record. There are no restrictions on the root user, because the root user is, by design, the one who administers the system. Root access exists so that the person responsible for the machine can do anything the machine is capable of doing. In the hands of someone who should not have it, root access means the ability to go anywhere and read anything, and leave very little trace of having done so. The account you were watching had used the MoveMail vulnerability to obtain root access on your system. It had found its way in not through a broken door, but through a very specific gap in a very specific piece of software. A gap that most people running that software did not know existed, that had not been widely publicized, that required genuine technical knowledge to find and exploit. Whoever this was, they understood Unix systems at a level that went beyond casual familiarity. They knew what they were looking for, and they knew how to find it. With root access in place, the sessions followed a consistent pattern. A survey of the user accounts on the system. Who is here? What are their access levels? Are any of them particularly interesting? A look at the configuration of the machine. What other machines does it know about? What connections does it have? What pathways exist outward from this node into the rest of the network? And then a search. A targeted, methodical search through files and directories, looking for particular things. You began to understand what things. As you read more sessions, a pattern in the searches became clear. The account was interested in anything connected to the Strategic Defense Initiative, the large and expensive American defense program, sometimes called Star Wars, that was one of the major preoccupations of the defense establishment in the mid-1980s. It was looking for documents, reports, technical specifications, anything that sounded like it might describe what the defense research community was working on and what it had found. It was looking specifically at military and defense-adjacent systems, the ones the laboratory's machines connected to through the ARPANET. These were not the interests of a curious graduate student who had found a gap in the network and was exploring it for the intellectual pleasure of the thing. The focus was too consistent, the targets too specific, the patience too sustained. This was purposeful. Someone wanted to know things, specific things, and they were willing to spend considerable time and effort finding them. This understanding changed the texture of the monitoring. The late nights became something different once you understood what you were watching. Less like the puzzled attention of someone trying to understand an anomaly, more like the focused attention of someone who knows there is a real thing happening and needs to understand its dimensions. The anomaly had become an event, and the event was ongoing. You also understood, more clearly now, why the account kept returning. It had not found what it was looking for yet, or it had found parts of it and needed more. The network was large. The information it was searching for was distributed across many systems, in many locations, accessible only by reaching each system in turn. The patience was not incidental. The patience was the method. The realization settled slowly, the way large realizations tend to settle when they are too significant to arrive all at once. This was not a problem you could solve by closing the gap in your system. The account would find another way in, or it already had. This was not a problem of one vulnerability. This was a problem of someone who had decided, for reasons you did not yet understand, that the ARPANET was a place worth exploring carefully, and who had the skills to do it. You kept reading the printouts. You kept your notes. You drew diagrams on paper. Which machine had been accessed, from which other machine, at what time, in what sequence. Tracing the paths of movement through the network, the way you had once traced the paths of objects through the sky. The diagrams grew, the picture grew, and through all of this, you had a problem that was making everything else more difficult. The sessions were traceable only while they were active. The moment the account logged out, the trail disappeared. You could see in your logs where the session had entered your systems, but following it backward, finding where it had come from, tracing it through the telephone switching equipment to its origin, required the active cooperation of the telephone companies and networking infrastructure involved, and that cooperation took time to arrange. By the time the arrangements were in place, the session had ended. The trail stopped. What you needed was a way to hold the session open, to give the trace more time. The sessions had revealed something important, a targeted, sustained interest in defense research and military systems, conducted by someone with real technical knowledge and considerable patience. The account was not browsing idly. It was searching for specific things, consistently, over many sessions. The challenge was that every session eventually ended, and when it ended, the trace stopped wherever it had reached. You needed the sessions to last longer. Section 5. The Honeypot. Autumn deepens in Berkeley. The hills above the campus go from gold to brown, the way they do when the rains have not yet started. The mornings are cool. The light comes in at a low angle that makes everything look slightly more considered than it did in July. The campus is full again after the summer. Students and researchers filling the paths, the libraries, the laboratories. The computing center is busy in the ordinary way of a working autumn term. Martha has had an idea. She has been sitting through the same late nights you have, reading the same printouts, listening to the same frustrated phone calls to agencies that do not quite know what to do with what you are telling them. She has watched the sessions come and go, watched the traces start and stop, watched the account disappear before anyone can follow it far enough. And she has noticed the same thing you have noticed. When the account finds something interesting, it slows down. It reads more carefully. It stays connected longer. So give it something interesting, she says. Give it something that looks exactly like what it is looking for, and make sure none of it is real. The idea is simple in the way that the most effective ideas sometimes are, clear in concept, elegant in structure, and somewhat delicate in the execution. The account is interested in anything connected to the Strategic Defense Initiative, to defense research, to classified or sensitive military programs. If you can build something that looks like exactly that kind of material and place it where the account will find it, the account will slow down. It will read. It will stay connected. And while it stays connected, the trace has time to advance. You create a directory on one of the laboratory's computers. You name it SDInet, a name constructed to sound like exactly the kind of thing the account would find interesting. SDI for Strategic Defense Initiative, Net for network. A network related to the Strategic Defense Initiative. The name alone should be enough to slow the browsing, to make the account pause and look more carefully. Inside the directory, you place files. The files have names that sound official and significant, the kind of names that might appear on documents related to a real defense research program. The contents of the files are carefully, painstakingly written to be plausible. They are formatted the way real documents are formatted. They use vocabulary that sounds right. They describe projects that do not exist, meetings that never happened, technical specifications for systems that were never built. The documents have the texture and the weight of genuine records. Every word of it is invented. Not one piece of actual classified or sensitive information appears anywhere in the directory. The files contain only fiction. Fiction designed with sufficient care that it would look, to someone scanning them at 2 a.m, exactly like the real thing. You do not do this entirely alone. Constructing plausible-sounding defense research documents requires knowing what plausible defense research documents look like, which is a form of knowledge you do not entirely have. You consult. You ask questions of people who know the vocabulary better than you do. You revise. The documents go through drafts, the way any careful writing does. A sentence that sounds too vague gets sharpened. A technical detail that does not quite ring true gets adjusted. A file name that seems too obvious gets changed to something more bureaucratic and therefore more convincing. The fiction has to be convincing enough to hold attention for long enough to matter. And you have learned from months of watching the account that it is not easily fooled. It reads carefully. It evaluates what it finds. If the SDInet files look wrong, if they have the feel of something fabricated rather than something real, the account will move on, and the trap will have failed. What you have built is sometimes called a honeypot, a term that was not yet standard in 1986, but describes the concept precisely. A honeypot is a trap made of attention rather than force. It does not block anything, prevent anything, or fight anything directly. It simply offers something that the person you are watching will not be able to resist. Something they will want to look at carefully. Something that will hold their interest long enough for you to do what you need to do while they are looking. The logic of the honeypot depends on understanding your subject. You can only build a convincing one if you know what the subject is looking for. In this case, you had months of printouts documenting exactly what it was looking for. The SDINet directory was not a guess. It was a product of careful observation, a response shaped precisely to the behavior you had been watching. The name, the document titles, the vocabulary inside the documents, all of it built from what the sessions had revealed about the account's interests. The trap was made from the subject's own searching. There was, of course, the waiting. The directory sat in the system, and the account continued its sessions, and the sessions did not find the directory immediately. Days passed. Weeks. You checked, each time, whether the directory had been visited. It had not. The account moved through other parts of the system, other connected systems, following its usual patterns. You were patient. Patience, by this point, had become something close to a professional habit. The SDINet directory sat in the system and waited. The account would find it eventually. That was the nature of the methodical, patient searching you had been watching for months. It would find the directory, and it would slow down, and it would stay. What you needed it to do was stay long enough for a trace. The honeypot was Martha's idea, and it was a trap made of plausible fiction, a directory of invented documents designed to look precisely like what the account had been searching for across months of patient sessions. It would work only if the account found it, only if the fiction was convincing enough to hold attention, only if the session lasted long enough for a trace to progress to something useful. The directory waited in the system, exactly as traps do. Section 6. The Trace. It was a Thursday in the spring of 1987. You were at the laboratory, as you so often were in the late evening hours. The printer was running. The account had logged in. The session opened with the usual pattern, a quick orientation, a survey of the environment, the beginning of the systematic movement through directories and files. You watched the paper emerge from the printer and read it as it came. Nothing unusual yet. The account moving through familiar territory. And then it paused. The interval between commands lengthened. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30. This was the signature of reading, not typing. When the account was moving, issuing commands, navigating through directories, the commands came quickly. When it was reading, when it had found something and was going through it carefully, the commands stopped, and the connection stayed open in silence. The pause meant the account had found something and was reading it. It had found SDINet. You reached for the telephone. The process of tracing a call in 1987 was physical in a way that is genuinely difficult to convey now, when call records are automatic and network logs are kept digitally and can be queried in seconds. In 1987, tracing a call meant calling the telephone company. Not a database, not an automated system. A person. An operator or a technician who managed the switching equipment, who could look at a physical device and determine which circuit a particular call was passing through at that moment, and who could then contact the next facility in the chain and ask them to do the same thing. This was not a request the telephone companies received often. The operators you reached were helpful but puzzled. You explained that you were tracking an unauthorized connection, that you needed to trace it backward through the switching equipment as quickly as possible. that the connection was active right now and would not stay active indefinitely. The operator understood the urgency in a general sense, without quite understanding the specifics of what you were describing. They looked at the equipment. They found the circuit. They told you which exchange to call next. You called the next exchange. Martha was at the printer, watching the output, keeping track of whether the session was still active. Every minute the connection stayed open was another minute for the trace to advance. The account was still reading. The SDINet files were doing what they were designed to do, holding attention. You stayed on the phone. The trace moved. From the laboratory's connection backward through the local telephone exchange, then to the next exchange, then further. The connection was not local. The switching equipment confirmed that it was traveling a long distance. Each step in the trace required a separate phone call to a separate operator at a separate facility, and each operator needed a moment to locate the circuit, verify the connection, and identify the next link in the chain. You held the telephone and waited while they worked. And while you waited, you could hear Martha's voice in the background, reading the printer output, confirming that the session was still active. The account was still reading the SDINet files, still connected, still giving you time. The trace followed the connection across the state, and then further east, the exchanges handing it off, one to the next, each call taking time, each step extending the chain while the session remained open at the laboratory. The session ended. The account logged out. The printer went quiet. The trace stopped where it had reached, the east coast of the United States, and a connection that went beyond the east coast, through a gateway into international circuits. The call was coming from overseas. You sat with this for a moment. It was not a complete trace. You did not yet know which country, which city, which institution or individual. You knew the direction, east, and then overseas. And you knew the word that described it, international. That word, when you brought it back to the agencies you had been calling, landed differently than anything you had said before. Not dramatically differently. There was no sudden energizing, no resources immediately committed, no sense that the institutions involved had been waiting for exactly this information. But the quality of the listening changed. Questions were asked that had not been asked before. Notes were taken. The investigation that had been, for months, essentially yours, conducted by you on the laboratory's equipment without official support or dedicated resources, began, slowly, to acquire company. The monitoring continued. The account kept returning, unaware, as far as you could tell, that its sessions were being watched and traced. Each new session was another opportunity. You had established by now something like a working relationship with the operators and technicians at the telephone companies involved. They knew who you were and what you needed, and how to move quickly when you called. The SDINet directory continued doing its work. Sessions that found the directory held longer. Sessions that held longer allowed the traces to advance further. The picture built up slowly, the way pictures built from partial traces always do. Not in a single decisive moment, but in increments. Each successful trace added a link to the chain. Each link narrowed the geography. The connection was not short-haul or domestic. It was crossing the Atlantic. The traces, over multiple sessions and multiple weeks, converged on a consistent point of origin in the routing. The commercial data network carrying the international connection was called TIMNet, a packet-switched network built for carrying data traffic across long distances. TIMnet operated across multiple countries, connecting users through a series of nodes that routed data to its destination. Tracing through TIMnet required working with TIMnet's own operators, who could look at the routing of a particular connection and tell you which node it had passed through and where the originating node was located. The connection was coming from West Germany. Specifically, as the traces accumulated enough information to become specific, from the region of Hanover, a city in the north of the country, at that time part of West Germany, in the years before German reunification. Someone in Hanover was sitting at a computer in the early hours of the German morning, the time difference accounting for the late California evenings when the sessions opened, issuing commands, reading files, moving through American research and military networks with patience and purpose. You had found the direction of the signal. Others would find the source. The trace had resolved to West Germany, to the region of Hanover, routed through the commercial TIMnet data network. An investigation that had begun with a 75-cent accounting discrepancy had arrived, through months of printer paper and late nights and phone calls to telephone operators, at an international connection. The laboratory's systems had been a waypoint, a corridor used by someone a continent and an ocean away. The finding passed into other hands. The spring light is different in Berkeley. Longer, warmer, less hurried than the sharp autumn mornings when the monitoring began. The hills above the campus have turned green with the winter rains, and the evenings come later now. The building at the foot of the hills is the same hum, the same corridors, the same machines running through the night. But the person inside it has changed. Months of reading have a way of doing that. Section 7. What the machines recorded. By the spring of 1987, the binders have accumulated. You have binders full of printouts from the monitoring sessions. You have notebooks where you recorded your observations while watching the printer, what the account was doing, what patterns you noticed, what you thought it might mean. You have the diagrams, hand-drawn maps of the network connections the account used, which machine accessed which, through which pathways, at which times. You have the notes from your phone calls to the FBI and the CIA and the other agencies, and what they said, and what you said in response. You have months of documentation, carefully organized, representing the record of an investigation conducted almost entirely alone and almost entirely on faith. The faith that the 75-cent discrepancy meant something, that the anomalous sessions mattered, that the patient movement through the network was worth following. The investigation has cost you sleep and time, and the kind of sustained attention that cannot easily be divided among other tasks. Martha has been there through most of it. The laboratory has tolerated your odd hours and your printer and your phone calls without, mostly, asking too many questions. You have operated in a kind of unofficial space, doing work that no one officially authorized and no one officially understood, because the concept of what you were doing was newer than the vocabulary for describing it. It is worth thinking carefully about what the machines did during this time, and what they did not do. The computers at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory recorded everything. Every login to every system, every command issued by every user, every file access, every network connection. The logs grew continuously through the investigation, adding entries for legitimate researchers running legitimate programs. At the same time, they added entries for the account moving through the system at 2 in the morning. The log made no distinction between these. It recorded a legitimate analysis session and an unauthorized intrusion with the same format, the same level of detail, the same complete and impartial attention. The log did not know that some of what it was recording was wrong. This is what logs do. They are complete, and they are, in the most neutral sense of the word, dumb. They contain everything and understand nothing. The record is faithful, and the record is blind. It captures every event and assigns meaning to none of them. Meaning is not something machines were good at in 1986. It is not something they are particularly good at now, in the ways that matter most for an investigation like this one. What you could do that the machines could not was recognize that a sequence of commands was unusual. Not unusual in a statistical sense. The machines could, in principle, have been programmed to notice that these sessions were happening outside normal hours, or that the commands being issued did not match the patterns of any known research workflow. But unusual in a contextual sense. Unusual in the way that something feels wrong before you can say exactly why it is wrong. Unusual in the way that a face in a crowd looks familiar before you have consciously placed it. That kind of recognition belongs to a human mind, and it cannot be fully separated from the person doing the recognizing. Your particular background mattered in this. The patience of the astronomer is not a generic skill. It is developed through specific practice, through years of learning to wait in productive ways, to hold attention without forcing conclusions, to let the pattern emerge from the data rather than imposing a pattern on the data prematurely. Someone who had spent their career in fast-moving environments, in work that demanded quick decisions and rapid iteration, might have read the same printouts and set them down. The 75 cents was not interesting enough in isolation to justify the time. It took a particular temperament, one trained in the slow accumulation of evidence across long observing runs, to treat the 75 cents as the beginning of something worth following. You could find the question inside the data. The machines could tell you what happened. Only you could ask why. This distinction matters, and it does not resolve itself neatly. The machines were indispensable. Without the logs, without the faithful, continuous, impartial record they kept of everything that passed through the system, there would have been nothing to read. The accounting log that started everything was a machine record. The session logs that let you watch the account in real time were machine records. The printer output that gave you a paper record of each session in sequence, preserving the exact commands and the exact responses, was produced by a machine responding automatically to input. The record was the foundation of everything. Without it, no investigation was possible. But the record was only ever a record. It became an investigation when a person decided to read it, and to keep reading it, and to bring to it the particular kind of attention that can recognize something anomalous in a long sequence of ordinary-looking events. That decision, to keep reading, to not set the printout down, to not let 75 cents go, was not something a machine made. It was something you made, in the specific context of being a particular person with a particular background and a particular cast of mind. The astronomer's patience. The astronomer's habit of watching for faint signals in the noise, of holding attention steady on something that moves too slowly to register as motion in any individual observation, but reveals its path across many observations taken over time. The investigation of a network intrusion and the observation of a distant moving object are not the same thing. But the disposition they require, the willingness to be present and attentive across long periods during which nothing much seems to happen, has a family resemblance. The sky is patient. The network is also patient. You have to be more patient than either. There is a way in which the whole investigation can be understood as an act of sustained attention. Not cleverness, though cleverness played its part. Not technology, though the technology was essential. Attention. The willingness to sit with something incomplete and resist the urge to declare it either resolved or unresolvable. To keep the printouts, to keep the binders, to keep coming in at odd hours, to keep calling the agencies that did not quite know what to do with what you were telling them. The investigation did not succeed because you were brilliant. It succeeded because you were present, because you kept reading, because you had the particular form of patience that comes from years of watching the sky do almost nothing, and knowing that the almost nothing contained, if you waited long enough, the thing you were looking for. The machines kept their records faithfully and completely and without understanding. The record became an investigation through the act of reading it, of bringing to the data the human capacity for pattern recognition, for narrative, for the intuition that a 75-cent discrepancy might contain something worth understanding. The investigation was, in its deepest structure, a collaboration between the faithful record-keeping of machines and the irreplaceable capacity of a person to ask what the record meant. Section 8. After the machines. The binders sit on the shelf in the office. The monitoring continues for a while longer because the investigation has a momentum of its own now, and because the account is still active, and because you are still the person who knows the most about what happened and how. But the shape of your role has changed. You have handed the thread to people with different tools and different authorities. German federal law enforcement, American intelligence and law enforcement agencies. People whose work happens in rooms and through processes that are not yours to see. You have given them what the log gave you, a faithful record. A record that, read carefully and patiently over many months, had revealed the shape of something that had been using the openness of the academic network, the purposes the network was never designed for. They will take that record and continue the work in ways that you cannot. You have begun writing. The book you are writing will be called The Cuckoo's Egg. The title comes from a behavior observed in certain species of cuckoo birds, which lay their eggs in the nests of other birds, leaving their offspring to be raised by hosts who do not know that the eggs in their nest are not their own. The metaphor is apt in a way you find satisfying. Something foreign had been left in the network's nest, growing quietly, being sustained by infrastructure built for other purposes entirely, unknown to the hosts who were, in effect, raising it. Writing the book turns out to require a different kind of patience than the investigation did. The investigation had the shape of a problem, unknown information, evidence to gather, a question to answer. The book has the shape of a story, which means it requires not just the facts but the texture. What it felt like to be at the printer at 2 a.m, what it felt like to call the FBI and be told politely that this was not quite their concern. What it felt like to watch the trace advance through one telephone exchange and then another, and then stop when the session ended. You write it as you lived it, in the first person, present tense, moving forward through time. The book will be published in 1989. It will be read by people who have never heard of ARPANET, who have never sat next to a printer at 2 a.m, who have never had to explain to a telephone operator what a network trace was and why they needed one right now, please. The session is still active. For those readers, the book will be an introduction to the network, to the vulnerability of connected systems, to the idea that the openness of the academic computing community, which was one of its great strengths, was also, under the right circumstances, something else entirely. What you had was the experience of it, the specific texture of following something patient and purposeful through a network not designed to be followed through. The physical reality of the printer, the paper, the telephone calls, the late nights, the maps on paper, the steadily growing binders. The understanding, slow, accumulating, resistant to being rushed, that the record machines keep of everything they do contains, if someone is willing to read it with sufficient care, the shape of whatever has passed through them. The investigation had moved beyond the computing center. What remained was the record. The months of printouts, the session logs, the hand-drawn maps of network connections. That record would become a book, and the book would become the first detailed public account of what network intrusion looked like from the inside, before there were standard names for it, before there were dedicated procedures, before there were institutions whose job it was to handle exactly this kind of thing. It began with a 75-cent discrepancy and a person who could not set the printout down. It is late now, wherever you are. The story has arrived at a quiet place. Not an ending exactly, because stories like this one have many endings, scattered across years and rooms, and people who are not ours to follow. But a resting place. The trace is complete. The binders are full. The printer has gone quiet. The part of this that was yours to do has been done. There is something gently reassuring, in retrospect, about how it started. Not with a dramatic breach, not with an alarm, not with anything that announced itself as important. A number that was off by 75 cents. A person who noticed. The willingness to keep reading, past the point where a reasonable person would have set the printout down and concluded that a rounding error was a rounding error and moved on. The willingness to keep reading is, in a certain light, the whole story. The log was always there. The sessions were always being recorded. The evidence was accumulating in the accounting files and the session records from the first night the account became active, waiting patiently in the machine's memory for someone to look at it carefully enough to see what it contained. The log did not hide anything. It did not need to be persuaded. It needed only to be read. The machines at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory kept running after you left the office that spring. They kept their logs, faithful and complete and unjudging. The ARPANET kept routing packets through its distributed web of connections, finding paths through whatever nodes were available, delivering information to wherever it was addressed. The network did not know what had happened inside it. It kept working, because that is what it was built to do, and because the work did not require knowing. In the years that followed, the network grew into something much larger than the ARPANET of 1986. The community it was built for, the relatively small world of researchers and academics who trusted each other and shared resources freely, became one small corner of a vastly larger and more various space. The trust that was built into the original architecture did not scale to a network of hundreds of millions of people who did not know each other and had not agreed to any shared norms. New architectures had to be invented, new tools built, new institutions created. The security that was an afterthought in the original design became, over time, a central preoccupation. Somewhere in that transition, the story of the 75-cent discrepancy became one of the first chapters of something much larger. The long, ongoing, never quite finished work of understanding what it means to trust a network, and what it costs when that trust is misplaced. But that is another story, and it is late. The hills above Berkeley are dark tonight. The building at the foot of the hills is lit from within, the way working buildings are when the work does not stop at sundown. Inside, somewhere, machines are keeping their records, logging what passes through them, maintaining the faithful, unjudging account of everything that happened today, as they have maintained it every day before, and as they will maintain it again tomorrow. It is enough to know this, and to let it run in the background, the way machines do. Sleep well.